I want to welcome Mandy Carter today and begin our talk, Advancing Each Other, Building Coalitions Across Communities. I want to thank the Overby Center, the School of Journalism and New Media. I want to thank the Sarah Isom Center for Women and Gender Studies, the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, and the Center for Inclusion and Cross-Cultural Engagement. I wanted to say, before I tell you a couple of things about this extraordinary woman, and I'm sure you all have seen the signs and have heard there's been quite a bit of buzz about our talk today. But I wanted to say that, one reason why I wanted to invite Mandy Carter and to develop a group of co-sponsors for the event was that, I believe in the ability, our ability to advance each other, to build local models for justice and peace. I believe in our ability to work with imperfection. I believe that we need to work with where we are to transform rather than transmit pain. And to do this through activism, and where activism can start on a grassroots level with the person sitting next to you or across the row from you. Diversity lives close to us, closer than we think. Mandy Carter is a Southern Black human rights activist and is a legend in the LGBTQ community. A resident of Durham, North Carolina, she is co-founder of Southerners on New Ground, SONG, a human rights organization devoted to uniting LGBTQ people in the South, as well as the poor, rural, and working class. Mandy Carter was first introduced to activism in 1965 when the Quaker-based American Friends Service Committee visited her high school in upstate New York. 2 years later, she hitchhiked across the country to San Francisco and began working with the pacifist-based War Resisters League. She also participated in the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1968 Poor People's Campaign. In San Francisco, she noticed sizable numbers of displaced gay and lesbian youth from the South who had moved to California in search of a more welcoming place. Carter never forgot their voices, wondering how she might work with others, outsiders and insiders alike, to forge stronger ties. She moved to North Carolina in 1983 and co-founded SONG. Mandy Carter has been called one of the nation's leading African-American lesbian activists by the National Organization for Women. In 2002, she worked to enlist the LGBTQ community to improve conditions for striking workers at the Mount Olive Pickle Company Incorporated plant in Mount Olive, North Carolina. Carter was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize as part of the 1,000 Women for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. She has done hard work organizing grassroots networks, especially for people of color in the South. She's also been the National Justice Coordinator of the Bayard Rustin 2013 Commemoration Project of the National Black Justice Coalition. She worked on many national and regional lesbian and gay pride marches, including the 1987 March on Washington for Lesbians and Gays. She is dedicated to connecting communities through activism and economic justice. Joining her on stage is Sarah Hine. Just maybe wave your hands, there's no particular. Sarah is a PhD student in English who researches the relationship between reproductive politics and creative practices in Southern lesbian literature. Kendrick Wallace is a second-year higher education student personnel master's student from Madison, Mississippi. He currently serves as the Associated Student Body's graduate assistant. Hooper Schultz is an MFA candidate in the Documentary Expressions program at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture and a historian whose master's work is focused mainly on the Carolina Gay Association at UNC Chapel Hill and on the Southeastern Gay Conferences of 1976 through 1978. Hooper is an oral history and archival collection field worker for the Mellon-funded Invisible Histories Project expansion through the University of Mississippi. And JoJo Brown. JoJo is a biology major interested in optometry. She serves as the vice president of the Gospel Choir. She's the co-director for academic and student success. She's from Madison, Mississippi, and is a senior here at Ole Miss. So without anything further, I'm going to get out of the way and let them have a conversation. And There'll be time for you all to ask questions and to participate as well. So please welcome Mandy Carter.
Mandy, Mark touched on it briefly in your bio, but I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how you came to live in the South.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. This is my first ever stop in Mississippi. I don't understand how that's possible. So you have to excuse me, but I am so excited. I'll be here for the next couple of days, so whatever we don't cover here, we'll have that conversation later. I have to say something, and thank you for joining me. When I got the invite, Mark, normally you get invited, you give a speech, and no. I rather figure out how we have a collective conversation, and so we are thinking about how this is a good set of what we're doing. Real quickly, I was born November 2nd, 1948. That's a part of the 74 million post-World War II baby boomers. But sadly, my brother Ronnie, and Dolores, I was born, our mother left and never came back. Life happens. Because of that, we were put into the 2 foster homes and an orphanage, became ward of the States of New York for my first 18 years. I share that because I will tell you that one of the key things, is this working? Okay. One of the things that I think when I look back upon it, and in my high school in Schenectady, New York, some of you in the audience might remember these dates, but these dates really are why I'm here today. I was in ninth grade. Well, first it was the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Then November 22nd, 1963, you know exactly what that date was. Kennedy assassinated in Dallas, Texas. And I remember our social studies teacher, and thank you to social studies teacher, brought in some young white staffer from an organization I had never heard of before, the American Friends Service Committee, Quakers. That one class changed my life because 3 things the gentleman said, and some of you might be able to relate to it. First, they were talking about the Quakers, religious society of friends, full equality and justice for all. Then he made this comment about the power of one, that each and every one of us has the potential to impact change, but it was the third thing. We have a high school work camp in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. Who would like to go? Yes. And because of that, this camp, they brought in resource people, and there was a young white folk singing couple, this is the days of Baez and Dylan, Guy and Candy Carowin from the Highlander Center in Tennessee. If you hadn't heard of the Highlander Center, it was created in 1932 intentionally to bring black and white folk to talk about what they were in Appalachia, what they were going to do around organizing in the South. But they called themselves cultural workers. I hadn't heard that before. But what they were doing, they were going around with the tape recorder and recording the freedom songs in the black churches, the freedom meetings in the black churches. And then they said, and by the way, if you ever make it out to San Francisco, if you ever make it to California, Joan Baez had just opened up the Institute for the Study of Nonviolence in Carmel Valley. But that's the first time at that work camp I had heard about Bayard Rustin. If you hadn't known about Bayard Rustin, you'll know these words, I have a dream today, because that's the 1963 March on Washington. But I ended up going to the Institute for the Study of Nonviolence in Carmel Valley. And they were organizing at that time about the war in Vietnam, whatever. But to make a long story short, when I was sitting in jail, a woman came over to me and said, have you ever heard of the War Resisters League? No. Would you like to come to a potluck? Potluck? Yeah, I went. That led me to getting a job in San Francisco. But because I was born in Albany, New York, I missed the 4 seasons. And I said, I'll take any job east of the Mississippi. You know where that job was? Durham, North Carolina. Nice. But here's the other part about my mother and the connection. Without knowing who she was and where she was born or anything, I had to get a driver's license, and in North Carolina, you had to get a birth certificate. I wrote to the Schenectady's Children's Home, and they said, not only will you give you your birth certificate, we'll give you all your paperwork. I got the paperwork, and I'm looking at the lineage. Mother, Emma B. Privet, born in Edenton, North Carolina. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And so for me to journey to Durham, and then I'm looking for my brother Ronnie. I didn't know where he was born. Raleigh, North Carolina. Unbelievable. I only share that because that's what got me in the South. But knowing that my mother was born in the South, knowing my brother, and of course, I go to Edenton, North Carolina real quick, and I said, I'd like to know more about the Privets. Ma'am, do you want to know about the black Privets or the white Privets? Hello. Then you know. Oldest city, oldest town, because that's all the slave ships came through. So by birth, even though I was born in Albany, but lineage, that's my Southern roots. I own it, I'll claim it. And I think anyone who's been in a situation of either foster home or orphanages or adoption, understanding that, to me, if you are not putting folks in these public schools, that's how I met Jack Hickey, how critical that might be in terms of public schools or whatever. But I feel humbled and honored. I was 17, and I met Candy Carolyn at 17. She and I are now on the National Council of Elders together. What's the chances of that? And I'm sitting on the stage with you all. And I feel so, we're in a moment. And I said, I have more questions. I'm curious. I want to know, and you got your questions as well. But I want to be it in with other folk together, make it a collective we. Are we good on that? Mm. In Mississippi, I'm going to Money, Mississippi tomorrow. Emmett Till told that story. So, yeah, thank you, Mississippi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mandy, you're one of the founders of the Southern LGBTQ plus racial and economic justice group, Southerners on New Ground, which we call SONG. Can you tell us a little bit about how SONG came to be, its past, where SONG is now, and maybe where it's headed?
Okay. Anyone else familiar with SONG or Southerners on New Ground? Some of you were familiar? Okay. It was really one of these interesting things. Another story. This is what I love about the South, too. You tell stories, storytelling. So in 1990, Jesse Helms, everyone knows, hopefully you know who Jesse Helms is, up for re-election. And the audacity of a black man named Howard, my mind is full, was going to run against Harvey Gantt, first black mayor of the largest city, Charlotte, first black to integrate Clemson, said, I'm going to run against Jesse Helms. And so a lot of us got organized. To make a long story short, because of that race and what we had to do in terms of organizing, it meant that the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force based in Washington, D.C. has a conference called Creating Change. And because of the work we did in 1990, they said, well, what if we decide to put that down south? And I said, yeah, we'll put a host together, committee, everything, and got all set. Then we started getting these kind of phone calls from people coming to the conference. Well, is there an airport down there? Durham is a 5-hour drive and an hour from D.C. Well, will we be able to get regular food, and what are grits? I said, no, come on, what? And the only thing we didn't get to hear are the streets paved down there. So we took our collective wisdom, and this is really important. Intentionally, we wanted to do a workshop, but intentionally, we brought 6 people together. 6. 3 white progressive Southern lesbians. Suzanne Farr wrote one of the best books, Homophobia, Weapon of Sexism, from Little Rock, Arkansas. Mab Segrist, Durham, wrote My Mama's Dead Squirrel, Organizing as an Out-White Lesbian Against the Klan in Durham. And then Pam McMichael, Louisville, Kentucky. That's your 3. Then we organized 3 black progressive Southern lesbians, Mandy Carter, War Resisters League Durham, Pat Hussein, organizing out of Atlanta. She calls herself a pissed off black dyke. And Joan Garner, who we recently lost, sadly. We decided to come together. We did a workshop. The workshop went so well, we thought, what would happen if we intentionally formed an organization? We met, and we formed our first mission statement, and the mission statement was, in 1993, building transformative models of organizing in the South that would connect race, class, culture, gender, sexual identity, and gender orientation. Since then, we have now been, in our almost 30 years, we've added a few more with new co-directors. We passed the co-director model on. Language justice, food insecurity. So as we continue to grow, it was not only about us owning it, it was how do we base that in the South authentically, deal with the issues in the South, but make it a collective we. We don't want to run anything we're trying to figure out. You just had this horrendous raid down happen here with these poultry down here, and SONG was a part of that. So for SONG to be based, but we're doing it with other people as well, it's not just us. But what I love is that it's still here. It is still here generationally, and we do that in terms of how do we talk about that in 1993, 2023 going forward. So it's an open invitation in terms of how that conversation's had. I would also say to you that this kind of town gown reality that we have, like we're in Durham, you're here, And how do we make sure there's a connection between the communities and all kind of variety, and then the campus community as well. So in a couple of years, will be the 30th, and we're trying to figure out now what. But that's the founding of how we got Song started, and it's thriving really quite well. And I think there's some folks in Jackson, Mississippi, that are a part of the local network here as well. Good?
Well,
You can tell we have these questions prepared, so this is good.
switching gears a little bit, just here recently, I actually was asked myself, do I consider myself an activist? And a lot of people, I would say, are fearful of that question because of the image of activists and sometimes even how like media can portray what activism looks like. So I think that a very suitable question would be like, how would you go about explaining to the students here on the campus what activism is supposed to look like? And even extending that question to say, what would you tell them and what truly defines an activist versus advocacy or an advocate?
And I hope that we get to have that conversation with you all as well. I want to go back to that power of one thing. And remember when I said at the time, I didn't get it, and then I realized I'm sitting right here, not far from Money, Mississippi, where the mother of Emmett Till did something extraordinary. She said, "I want an open casket. I want people to see what hate looks like." For a mother to make that comment and having no idea what that would have been, that's an activist. And I wonder sometimes, with this kind of movement stuff, there's a romanticizing sometimes. So the story of Emmett Till's mother asking to do that. Then the question becomes, remember when someone said Bayard who? A lot of people think, well, I can't do that. I can't be a Dr. King. I can't be so-and-so. But if you put people on that level but that's them. No. I mean, every day we wake up and we think about how we go about our daily lives. Remember, Jamie, we talked about on your show. And if you were asked yourself, what's the one thing I may or may not able to get done? And here would be a typical example, especially on college campuses. You hear a sexist comment, a racist comment, a homophobic comment, what do? You can either sit in silence, not me, or you say something, but silence is the voice of complicity. I'll repeat what I just said. Silence is the voice of complicity. And then you have to ask yourself, how do I go about my business every day? It doesn't have to be something major, but if we maybe tamp it down about what an activist looks like or what an activist needs to be, and more about, and what's the thing I can do in my day-to-day going about that can just make a difference in people's lives, I think that would make it. Now, on the other hand, if you collectivize that activism, then you can see the difference. I was just making an example, like Mount Olive pickles. If I have just a quick minute, when Song got first started, and we were being defined with those terms that I said to you, we said we wanted to be involved in something that was not LGBT, specifically on purpose. And at the time, Mount Olive is like a farm out in eastern North Carolina. They grow tons of cucumbers. That's what you make pickles out of. And at the time, there had been a really tragedy of one of the farm workers there and ended up being killed and whatever. But Valdemar Vasquez from the Farm Labor Organizing Committee organized a meeting at a local Catholic church, and they invited people at the table. We intentionally showed up at that table, Song did, and they were just asking people to make calls or whatever. And I remember thinking, well, we're all about equality, gay and lesbians. We know about equality. I'm going to make some calls to our community. The first call I made to a lesbian friend, and her response was, pickles? What's that got to do with me being a lesbian? And I was in tears when I heard that answer. I said, what? And then I realized something after I got off that call. Has anyone ever been to San Francisco Pride or one of these Pride events? It's just, as far as the eye can see is rainbows. In San Francisco Pride, at one of them, in then comes down that bright red flag with the black eagle. That's the United Farm Worker. They were at our Pride. Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta. And then I also thought about, but if everyone only defines equality in these very limited terms, why else would you think it would be anything else? To make a long story short, once we had that conversation, we ended up joining the Mount Olive pickle boycott. They had a union in 5 years. So activism was something like, I can go into a store, I don't have to buy Mount Olive, and I'll tell the manager why I'm not. But if the University of Mississippi says we're not going to put contracts with Mount Olive, then you have a whole new conversation, or schools or businesses. And that's when you really begin to realize the power of one and then how you multiply it. So activism, little a, I put it more like, I'm going to get something done today, whatever that might be, and thinking about how that might be. But that's two stories that I think is really an example of someone just doing something, and whether you label it or not, but more important, it got done. Powerful. Right.
I guess before I hop into my question, I always think when someone asks that specific question about like what does activism look like on college campuses, I had a conversation with my parents a couple years ago thinking when I was going to my master's degree I'm doing now in higher education, I was thinking, I mean, I've graduated once, I walked across the stage, I did that, I may not do it again when I graduate.
Okay.
But my parents were like, you're going to walk. They said, you're going to walk, we're going to be there and you're going to walk. And I asked them why.
Yeah.
And they mentioned because that at institutions in the South, to them and to me, is a form of activism. To walk across the stage as a Black queer man saying that I got this degree at this institution, like that is a form of activism. So I think when people try and downplay students who aren't out there with signs, you know, and bullhorns and making a lot of quote unquote noise and labeling other people as not having any form of activism, I think is kind of ridiculous.
That's
so
a good point. Really
I appreciate your points.
Yeah.
So sort of thinking about my experience in higher education and thinking about coalitions across communities, I thought about if you like label communities on college campus, like students, faculty, staff, administrators, whatever. And you see staff members and students sometimes coalesce together to push forward kind of activism on college campuses. So when compared to tenured faculty members on campuses, staff members often feel a bit less empowered to use their positions to bolster the voice of their students, especially when that voice maybe contradicts the voices of administrators and or stockholders for the institution. So thinking about the fear of job action, kind of in your opinion, how would you suggest staff members navigate creating coalitions with their students while also elevating the
Was the
student
key word
activist
in there
voice?
tenured?
Yes.
Keyword there, tenured. I might have my job. Well, you know, and what I'm going to be excited about being here for today and tomorrow is to kind of hear these conversations, because sometimes, you know, depending on who's in the room, you may not be able to speak up. But what I'm really, and here's again, it happened at, now maybe it makes a difference if you're like a state school or like if you're a private institution, because remember the Muslim ban, and you saw the huge response to that. And not where I live in North Carolina, there's not much you could do with the University of North Carolina system. And anyone else here from North Carolina? Any other Carolinians in the room, or a handful, 3, 4? But that made a difference. The school, but when you have a school like Duke or some others where they didn't have to necessarily go along with that plan, I think. And the question is, if you can do it and don't. That's the part that concerns me. If you can do it and you don't. But on Duke, they said, no, we ain't having this. We're not going to be turning these names in. Now, they could have lost some fundings. You had like trustees and whatnot. But the power to say no, and how many people showed up at those airports? So I just wonder, though, coming into a school, and I don't know how many people have come here who have got their degrees or a tenure, whatever, would you go to a school where you can have the freedom to be who you are, what your statements are, what you believe in, or do you have to be very quiet about it, or do you have to be very... what word am I looking for? Like, careful, whatever that might be. But all you need is a couple. But here's the other thing. You know that statement, so goes the South, so goes the country? In some cases, so goes a particular university. If someone's looking at that university, that might be the thing saying, because they did it, we can do it too. And if you have that level of, yeah, I can do that, but someone has to be the first one to stand up, somebody or someone's. And then once you have that, and I'll tell you quite honestly, if you get pushback, it probably means you're doing something right. It's when you get the who cares? No, ain't having that, then you know you might be on it. You might be onto something. And a lot of people take the cues from staff, faculty, and here's the big one: who's the board? What do you call them? The board, alumni,
IHL, trustees with
yeah.
IHL.
How much power they have?
They got a lot.
Right? Much. I don't want to be venturing into anything here, but I just know that. But on the other hand, at Duke, this is the other good thing. Besides that Muslim ban, they had to vote whether they were going to divest of their holdings in South Africa. We put up a mock shanty at the Duke campus right there overnight, got up in the morning, and in silence had our signs out, divest, Duke, whatever. The board would go walking by, and lo and behold, they voted to divest. That was a game changer. So had it not been for students community coming on, having that conversation at Duke, and then within the community, and having that vote. The same thing happens at other campuses as well. My question would be for the University of Mississippi, when you think of, is there anything coming up? Are there times when you can actually have a voice or have a say that could impact not only the rest of the campus community, college community, but the community, and then who's sitting over there in your state house or local city councils, whatever. That's what I'm saying while we're in the moment. So these questions you're asking, it's relevant to right now, but it can be done, and who's going to do it? But again, silence is the voice of complicity, and if someone says, don't matter, I don't hear you, I can't see you, tell me what you're trying to get done, and tell me then how can I, just as one person, individual, be a part of that. You do not have Chick-fil-A on this campus, I hope.
We do.
We do. It's in the union.
We are not going to go eat lunch at Chick-fil-A on this campus.
No, I
But
will
you know
not.
where I'm going with? I'm being unsincere, for real. And why? I mean, with all due respect, I love my chicken, but when they're spending thousands of dollars to make sure that black folk and LGBT folk don't get it, I'm sorry. All right, next question.
Mandy, we can kind of talk about a little bit more about Duke and Durham. My question is going to be: you've lived a lot of your life as an activist with a home base in Durham, North Carolina, and as a fellow North Carolinian, I know that Durham has a long history of racial and lesbian feminist organizing and community. And so I'm wondering if you can speak kind of to the value as an activist of community and being in a community home, and maybe beyond what we think of like big A activism and action, what the value of community is.
Now, is this about, the kind of town gown thing, or more of the...
I think I'm more interested in how you see yourself within both of those communities of like black organizing in Durham as well as lesbian feminist organizing in Durham.
And depending on where people were born and raised, I just find it interesting. In Durham, it's a very small, very very, very confined, not in a bad way. But because of that, and Durham has a long, deep black history. when slaves were let go and they were all coming up there, that was certainly one of the main places. In fact, Black Wall Street. But because you have like a number of historically black colleges in North Carolina, you do here as well. But when you're in a town, when you have an institution like Duke and even North Carolina UNC, North Carolina Central University, there had been this intentional way of how North Carolina Central University, which, by the way, has their first ever LGBT and ally center at that institution, they figured out how they could have conversation with Duke University. It's called the Southwest Quality of Life Project. So for people like me I'm not in college, I'm a community activist, we try to figure out how we can figure out how we set up intentional spaces to have the conversation. So Durham, but it also involves the Durham City Council. This is where we got to do with the divestment of the holdings in South Africa. So the Durham City Council said, we need to do it. Then they said, Duke, are you going to do it? Other schools are going to do it as well. So for me, I only got as far as high school. But for me to be a community activist, I was trying to figure out, how do I intentionally touch you? How do I intentionally figure out where you are? You know how I show up where y'all are? We have to be where those spaces are and have the conversation in a way that people can get it. But Duke is the single largest employer in the city of Durham. And whenever you have that kind of interesting relationship, that's an up and a down. So we have everything from LGBTQ, racial justice, economic justice, food justice. But there's ways in which you intentionally set, like, see how we're sitting, like if we were sitting around that table, so there would be a chair for y'all, there'd be a chair for the city council, there'd be a chair for people who are like El Centro Hispano, and then we get in that conversation and ask, here's the question, the why, the who, and then more importantly, the how. But the how about who you are, your language, and how you're going to bring that to the table. So what I find exciting and why I'm so intrigued about this conversation now is, and what do we do with what the reality we have right now in terms of like the country, my state, whatever. But I think the intentionality of it, and here's another one, sometimes it's around food. Sometimes it's around fun stuff. It doesn't have to always be this intense work. Have a meal. What are we going to do about this? Whatever. But that's kept me in the long haul. Here's the other one. You get paid. You can literally get paid to do this work. People have figured out you have funders, foundations, you have individual people who want to give money to free you up to do this work full time. And there's a wonderful thing called resource generation. If you can Google in resourcegeneration.org, it's young people with inherited wealth wanting to give it away. Then you have some other funders. But if you're looking at your profession and you want to move on, like what do you want to do when you leave here? If you could get doing this job full time with your gift, if you're a doctor or if you're English or whatever it might be, you want to be, but then you bring that gift to the table, but you share it and make sure it's not only mine. But I think it's almost shaking up the narrative, like think outside the box. But that's what's kept me going, and I now live on Social Security, $821 a month. Don't touch it, don't go near it. But I get complimented because other people are helping me to do this work. And that would be a model, I would think, of how that might happen, right? Would you like to be gainfully employed when you leave here to make some mark socially and whatever it might be, what your love is and what your passion is? I like it. Huh?
Yes.
Sounds nice. Most definitely. I like that a lot.
All right, we're talking about how many zeros after that, but but how much do you really need to live on? I'm just curious. All right, we doing good?
We're doing great.
All right.
Yeah, I think
How
so.
are we doing for time?
How much time we got left?
Oh,
I have a question for everyone here on this panel. So when I wake up in the morning, I have this little thing I do. It's just a little thing. It's not, there's a word for it. It's not scientific. So when I wake up in the morning, I ask myself this, and I'm going to ask each one of you, and be honest.
Okay.
On a scale of 1 to 10, right now, where you are in your life at this moment, what's your level of optimism? Okay? And the scale is 1 is like, was there any point getting up this morning? To 10, bring it. All right? So think about that for 2 seconds. So we'll start this way. On a scale of 1 to 10, and when you define, it's not scientific, and anyone else can do this as well, but like, you wake up, like, how are things going? What do I think's going on? And then we'll get into the Q&A thing. So, Jojo, 1 to 10. I ain't holding you to it.
I say about a solid 4.
All right. Why?
I was exhausted. Like, I was thinking about all the things that I need to get done, I guess, and sometimes those thoughts can be a little overwhelming. Class at 8 a.m. sharp. I was thinking about my exam that I had just taken in that class, and how I expected to score so much higher than what I did. I was upset because my professor still hasn't responded to my email, and it's been over 72 hours. Just a lot of stuff.
All right. That's good. Kendrick?
Can I do like a decimal in there as well?
You would.
Can I do a point? Okay, well, but it's a good
Yes,
point.
you
Okay.
may. Yes, you may.
Let me give it like an 8.7. I would give it decently high. And I'll give you 2 reasons.
Okay.
One of which is okay, Kendrick. The other one's okay, that makes sense. So my first one is, I love gardening, I love plants. And I have been growing a pineapple top at my apartment. So I got a pineapple from Kroger and I stuck it on the ground.
Oh,
and
it'll grow?
For the past 2.5 years, I've been growing up my plant, and I got my very first pineapple harvest last week.
For real? For real?
Yes, for real. And let me tell you, it was sweet. It was sweet and it was good. Okay, and 2, I think a real reason is I got an email this morning saying that I'm getting a phone and a Skype interview for a job potentially after I graduate here from this university. So that was really good to get the sign that I'm doing that I'm doing what I enjoy, and that I can get opportunity through what I love doing.
Oh.
So that was a really good boost this morning.
Right. And why the 8.9? Or 8.7, what was it?
Yeah, it was 8.7. Just because, 8's good, and 9 is great. I'm going to say I'm at a good great. A good great. Or a great good, whatever.
All right, Sarah.
So I like to try to cultivate optimism in the morning. I do wake up as a very optimistic person. So I would say a 9.
Oh.
Especially on days like today when I'm doing something like this, but it's hard. During the day, it will plummet. It often does. But it's something where I try to like almost like fake it till I make it, just because I feel like, you know, cynicism is the quickest way to apathy and inaction. And so I just try not to fall into that. I feel like it's too easy, you know?
Okay, it's good. Yeah. Hooper?
Well, I'll preface this by saying that people who know me know that I'm a fairly buoyant person.
Buoyant.
So it's really hard to
really?
like shake
Okay.
me. So I would say a 9, definitely.
wow.
I think that when I like look at my life and how things are going, I'm very pleased with that. I live with Sarah. We have a great house. It's, you know, like I can't really complain. I think like when we think about the state of the world or the state of the nation, sometimes that can be like overwhelming and not necessarily things are going in the way that we might like. But when I think about our community here at the University of Mississippi and people who are working really hard every day to make things better, that's really encouraging to me. Like there are lots of people who are doing a lot more than me. So yeah, I don't really, the future looks bright to me.
Anyone keep track of the 4899 to get a thing? Just kidding. All right, so I think it's time for, are we doing Q&A? I have a gift. I'm going to put these out while we're getting ready for the Q&A. Today is the first day of early voting in the state of North Carolina. We had to fight for that. Can you have to, both on either end. And one of the things that we figured out, when you remember, and this is also the 100th year of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Remember that little thing? And also, this is the year where potentially, when I looked at the demographic, my age group is about 74 million. Can we just do a quick show of hands if no one's uncomfortable? Anyone born between the years of 1946 and 1964? Anyone between the ages of 18 and 35? I can count. That's the number that we look at in terms of what's going to happen with this upcoming election, in terms of where we're going, and that helps me. What you're being given now, because you don't have early voting in the state of Mississippi, is right? You only have one day. What y'all going to do about that? That was a rhetorical question. What you're being given is what we just put out to Democracy North Carolina. It's a nonpartisan how to vote, what you can do. But here's the exciting news. I don't know if this is true here, but anyone going to the University of North Carolina system can vote with their college ID. That's a game changer for us to be able to do that. Wow. But that's a gift for you. We have 2 weeks, and we'll see what's going to happen. And if you run out, we have more down here. And we also have it in Spanish as well, in terms of that. So, what now?
Should we open it up?
We can open it up unless there are other questions, but I said we open it up.
Yeah, open it up. And thank you again for coming. I do appreciate that very much.
Thank
y'all.
you for being here.
Thank you.
Several questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead and then up.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
So my question was like kind of when you did the gauge and how everybody's feeling optimism on today. JoJo, you had before, and I realized I'm in my junior year of college, and now I have more of those for my between 1 and 5 days more often now, and I just want to know like what do you do when you're feeling like between 1 and 5?
Are you asking me specifically?
No, I guess like
For the people who, I was gonna say we need to ask the people. we need to ask them clearly. The experts. We need to go to the 9 house.
I was going to say, but actually, yeah. I know, but I love though in an interesting kind of way, because someone, if it's whatever that number is, it's like what is it, and more importantly, what do you do with it? And then you might find out there's a bunch of other 4s here. It's almost like how do you measure it? Now it's all by, but it is by the day. I mean, you wake up and you're still waiting to hear, and you don't know, someone didn't respond to your call and what that might be. I think the 10 thing is more of, I always like to think about what the potential might be, and then you backtrack to your individual day and how much energy, how much time, where I'm going to be. But this overall kind of like, I think I'm kind of there, and keeping that hope and optimism. But then there's the reality, what you just talked about, day to day. What do you do with, there's things that control your life, not in a negative way, but But I just think if we pose it and question it, and then maybe figure out how we spend our day whenever we have Pam has a term called skinny minute, like you have a little minute. But I don't know. I mean, if we did this whole audience, we don't have much time, but I'd just be curious where people are on that scale. But that's today. Mm-hmm. What about 5 years from now? The other question I have, and I'll put this out, is another one. Don't answer it necessarily, but if you were to say 10 years from now, how old will you be? This is a question. 10 years from now, how old will you be? And where do you see yourself 10 years from now? And I oftentimes give, if I can just give to tomorrow. But you do that because in order to figure out where you want to be 10 years from now, then you backtrack it. If I want to be there, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? What do I have to do? And for me as an organizer, and I would put this out to anyone organizing, we should be putting ourselves out of a job. Think about it. If we do a good job, there's no reason why we even have to have the organization, but the insanity of people who are sitting in these city councils or whoever, and then you wonder, and why? And who controls our daily life every day, and how do we make those choices? But if you think about that, I mean, I'm not here to keep going song. If anything, I want song to close the doors because we got the job done. I mean, think about that. Or what the gifts are. Why am I having to pay for anything? There used to be a time when there was no money. People had the ability to trade your services, your talent, your skills. I mean, you just think outside the box of what that might be and thinking about where. And here's the final thing I'll say. Demographically, here we are. By 2050, if not sooner, this country will be majority people of color. Keeping in mind who was already here. Who was already here? Women are now the majority of the population in the state of North Carolina. There was a time women couldn't vote, couldn't serve in the military, couldn't do all those crazy kind of things, but you just saw in Virginia, ERA might be coming up. The age thing I just told you about in terms of our numbers, there's too many good signs about we're potentially, and maybe the way we're really looking at this horrendous, that's backlash. They're trying to say it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. I do believe that. It's not if, it's when. So every time you get one of these horrendous, we're not going to do that, we're going to take away this, we're going to do that. They're just basically saying we're just trying to figure out how we can hold you all up. Not if, but when. Mm-hmm. And more importantly then, who needs to be in that conversation with each other and having the conversation, and not only in English, but whatever. Because then you're thinking, well, now wait a minute. This is a whole different way of looking at this. It's more of a how do we then proactively go that direction and who we have conversation with. So that's why I just think we're and the census is coming up. That's the next 10 years. So there's a lot of good signs, and then just how do we engage each other and figure that out. Can I ask how many people who are going to be graduating and how many seniors here in the room? Do you know where you're going? Are you going to stay here, go away? Do you have any good job prospects? Do you know? I mean, that's real. Mm-hmm. And how much student debt y'all carrying? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's real. And sometimes it's about what you want to do and then what you're limited to because these are parameters. I'll stop, but yeah. Any other? Mm-hmm.
So I teach beginning journalism students, and one of the things that we have to practice a lot is getting out of their comfort zone, meeting people who are different than they, engaging, asking them questions, interviewing and so forth. I just, excuse me, wondering what you do to prepare yourself to talk to across gaps or, or across differences and to encounter people who are different. What are some things that help you be prepared? Because I think that's one thing our students haven't had a lot of. They've been mediated through screens much of their adolescence. So give us some thoughts. What are some things that you do to prepare yourself?
Yeah, and I'd be curious if y'all as well. I can tell you practically, it's where we show up. I mean, I think we tend to just get around the tables that we're most comfortable with, and that's understandable. But I'm thinking, like, there's a few things coming up right now, and that might be the town gown thing. But if we intentionally go to where another person's table is, or if we intentionally show up in another meeting, like I was just there's a thing called BYP 100, Black Youth Power. And I think the average age was, 25? I intentionally showed up at that meeting. I want to be a part of that conversation. Some of them were wondering why. Some of them were ecstatic, but there's the intentionality of it, but also there's just the practical things that have to happen. But I just wonder, when you're on college, how much time do you have? Do you have time to get to anything that's beyond your practice and your school? And if that's the case, how do you do that? It's more of a practical question, and then let alone if you're a teacher or faculty. But I think it's going to be, keyword, intentional, and willing to take a risk of, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm willing to kind of be a part of that conversation. Mm-hmm. But throw it back to you. What would be one or two of yours? What would you suggest?
Well, I think it's trying to, for me, it's like talking to myself. One of the personal values is being able to listen to other people, things I don't agree with,
Mm-hmm.
or things that are counter to my experience, and being curious about the way other people live their lives. So I try to sort of stoke the fires of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And stuck in because I always tell myself, I was really shy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I'm not now.
Yeah.
But as a journalist, but I think that it's hard for our students to move to just even to think about talking to people, especially people who are different, or people who might be judging them, or people who all of that. It's pretty natural. And,
Well, all you know is all you know. All you know is all you know until something else comes along that's different. And with all due respect, I always wonder, and I don't know if this happened to any of you, but, well, all I ever knew was boom, and then all of a sudden something else comes along, and then you said, I didn't know that. But is the word empathy, whether it's empathetic, or, I don't know, it's just, people just feel comfortable. I just know who I know. I'm good with my peeps and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But there must be something. It's almost like, but here's a question I would ask, and no matter what else, if you had to answer this question, what would be the one or two things for you personally in your daily lives that would put you at a table with someone that you don't even know, but you still have the same vision and, like, clean air? Think about it. No one should be homeless. Everyone should eat. Medical, school, whatever it might. But until you have, then the question is, who's going to set up that initial conversation? But they're out there. The question is, do we know it? Be aware of it. I would tell you, college campuses. I don't know how we'd have movements without college campuses. I really don't. They're so essential. And then the question is, when you leave here, if you're here, do you leave, do you go home, or whatever, or if there's things that you can do on the campus. But when I said earlier about the gifts that you have, that you take that with you, whether it's around issues of color or class or whatever, those gifts are with you. But sometimes it's like thinking outside the box, you challenge it. Like, for instance, the fact that I had to had to wait 18 years to find out what my mother's name was, no. The reason they said that would be good because that would be less painful for you. You have no idea the pain. I have to tell you, I reconnected with Ronnie. 59 years, I just finally got my brother Ronnie back. And I asked him, what did they tell you when they sent me away to the Schenectady Children's Home? You didn't want to be here anymore. Telling that to my brother. And then if that's the system you get from schools of social work, and that's what they're telling you, that is not a good policy, or more importantly, what's your medical rec history? I have not a clue, no one told me. You know what I mean? So when you think about, and who's going to challenge that though? If that's how you're being taught to be in these classes, who's going to say, I think we might want to do this a little differently, or you know what, create something else, whatever it might be. So it's almost like think outside the box. And then one funny one I want to add, this what's one. I was riding in the car today, getting ready to do your podcast, Jimmy, and I was sitting here thinking when someone made the comment about, well, what can little old me do, thinking about each one of us, and then I thought about the fact when I look around how you get up in the morning, and remember that thing about what's the one thing I can do today, and you write it down, figure it out. But one of the ones is a lesbian, and this is why we get into the L. Remember, it used to be the gay student union, the gay, blah, blah, blah. And now we have the L word. And someone said, well, what's up with the L word? Because when they were doing medical stuff on women, they didn't include lesbians. And someone asked a woman, said, well, what's your method of birth control? Well, that's my partner, Mary. Think about it. You know, I mean, but so the narrative is just so, But if you think, yeah, well, yeah, all right, challenge it. Figure out how you might want to make that change. But who's going to do it? And then if you don't want to organize, create it, just go make it happen. You have social workers for peace now. You've got doctors, whatever it might be. And so if I go around with each one of you and said, you're going back to Carolina, right?
Maybe.
Maybe. Oh, no one knows that? Or can we wrap it up with just one thing, or do we, right? Each one of you, this is my closing question for you, unless there's another one burning that you have to ask, yes.
I just want to ask a question. How did you deal with people who are not willing to understand feminism?
Could you all hear that?
No.
How are you willing to
Sorry, how did you deal with people who weren't?
Oh, in agreement? Yeah.
So, because recently, we have, in Korea, a transgender student. She was the first student who, gained admission to only women university, but she withdrew because of
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
so she was afraid.
right.
She wasn't safe.
So she left. Yeah, that's real. Yeah.
Korean activists were, really frustrated. So I don't know how did you
Well, you're on campuses. This happened on this campus? What happened? Or some? Oh, in Korea. Oh, I see, Korea. Well, and we could answer I think one thing, practically speaking, at some point, you realize someone's gonna be in opposition, but you get to kill me because of it. You put laws on the books to make sure I don't get it. That's when we start getting into, you might not be on the same page with me, but how do we deal with it? And when you have a society, remember, women, we came literally as property on those slave ships coming here. And before then, when they were writing the Declaration of Independence or whatever, but no women, not you. So that meant women were cut out. So once we had this long journey, and that's what I love, people said, we're going to make something happen. We make the change, whatever it might be. And then when black folk finally got the right to be citizens, we were told the exact same thing they said to women. You see a pattern here? And who should be in coalition and partnership with each other? But I would say to you that there are times when you're not going to change someone's mind. And then you know what? Thank you, and I'm going to go put my energy and time at least. And here's the one, it's the movable middle. It's not those who are 100% for me, not those 100% against me. It's the movable middle. And oftentimes that's the folk that could literally make the difference. And also I wonder in terms of other countries, how that gets handled. But again, do you get to kill me? Do you try to take all my rights away? But at some point you said, we're going to make something change. We're going to make it happen no matter what. But in solidarity, not being alone and feeling like you're the only one. That's all I could say in terms of not being a campus person or what that was. But I think that might be true. And I don't know if either one, and if you want to respond to that question or not. I mean, it's a good one. What do you do?
I just think that I've been sitting over here. I don't even know if y'all have noticed. I've been fidgeting. It's like these conversations get me so angry because I don't see a lot of the progress that there should be, especially here on the campus of the university. Everything that you said, even though it's pertaining to different identities, what we specifically experience here, I think that even with the professor who asked the question about initiating these conversations with students and trying to figure out how do we bridge that gap, I think that that's always a question here at the university, and it's been like that for years. And every time you answer a question, I'm thinking to myself, why is she not visiting Mississippi earlier than this? But I think that we are just way too comfortable. I think even the people that consider themselves activists are way too comfortable. I think that that's something as a senior. Getting ready to leave, thinking about the seniors that I came up with, they left us a nice little layout. They were like, look, we giving this to y'all. And, they were extremely strong leaders. But it's like when they left, all I hear is crickets.
Really?
Crickets. I mean, they were working even when there was nothing going on to initiate that anger. And I think that everybody's comfortable. And a wise man once told me, you know, you're not growing if you're comfortable. And so it's like, you know, being able to sit in a space, and you said intentionality is how you combat that, initiating that conversation. I think that we're just way too comfortable. We're comfortable sitting at a table, just like you said, with people that just look like me or identify with what I identify as. And, you know, we're just super comfortable and got our feet kicked up. So I'm trying to figure out, you know, and how do we move past that? How do we, you know, initiate those conversations without stepping on any toes? Like it's so difficult. It's something that and that's another reason also why I feel like Yasmin said that some days we have specifically here in Black History Month, we're constantly reminded of the advancement that we, you know, expected, but still don't have. You know, when you're saying it's not about if, it's about when is it going to happen? Yeah. You know, so and that's just real. Like, I don't know. It's just this conversation. It's like a fire just automatically ignites. And I don't want to walk around and be that angry Black woman across the campus, but that's how you feel. That's where that 4 comes in. Comes in at, I'm facing so many disparities on this university, and I feel like nobody is listening to me. And it's like we're constantly preaching to the choir. So with the demographics of this room, it looked totally different at the, you know, Lift Every Voice Award that we just had recently. It's people in there that are sitting in there looking like me. In the town hall that we had that was pertaining to the situation with the statue, it's people in there facilitating the conversations that look like me. So why is it that every time I enter a room, it feels like they're preaching to the choir, you know? But then if we bring in, you know, all these other people and that don't look like us, and we have these conversations or find some way to, you know, bridge that gap, I think that the climate would change so much. I don't know. Maybe if we offer points that the sororities offer to show up to those events and sit in those communities and get an understanding of why we're mad, why we're saying this stuff on Twitter, why you watching us go crazy on Facebook because some man lost his mind on Facebook because he doesn't believe the credibility of this, you know, he doesn't, you know, trust the credibility of a Black man and what he did and what we look like and how our image is here. I don't know. I just think that, you know, I'm sorry. I'm ranting.
No, it's good. Yeah,
but I'm mad.
Responding. Yeah.
I'm mad as hell. Like, you know, in 2017, I served as the president of the NAACP here on campus, and my parents were so upset with me because they were like, "You're putting yourself in danger. This is dangerous." And we've experienced so much, and I feel like that's a conversation we have to have behind the scenes when all of this is over. But you just don't know the tea, and I wish that you did. And I feel like you could give us more if you knew that tea. So I think that that's a conversation that we should have. But I just think that, you know, I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
No, it's good. Yeah. And then I'll ask you both. That's the best. Then I'll turn the question around. If everyone leaves, who's left? Who's left behind? What do you do with it? I mean, and you can see both versions about leaving. But if everyone goes and no one's here, and so I'll pose. What do we do, Kendrick? I mean, that's a good one. You just laid it out. But then then who stays? Who's going to be around to help make that difference? Go ahead.
Exactly. I think that is a question that I get a lot when someone asks, "Okay, where are you going next?" You know, because when you graduate, the idea is that you must be leaving to go somewhere else. But for a long time, and still now, it's not that I have a big urge to leave because I see and experience things here that I understand is not right, and don't want to happen to anybody else. So, to my idea, in that question you asked is, somebody needs to be here to stay, and or if you're going to leave, create that coalition. Yeah, right. You know, we were talking about social media being behind our phones. I think social media is a big way that now students are trying to create coalitions across not just, you know, classrooms, not just states, but like countries. You know what I mean? So maybe if you feel that the spirit is leading you somewhere else to be out of the South, out of Mississippi, maybe take some time now to instill those values into people like JoJo, where when we were leaving, we were seniors, we are leaving this groundwork behind for you to keep building upon. Because if you just leave the foundation without any wood on it, we can't build a house.
Right?
So,
and who wants to be the bridge builders as well?
Exactly.
Responses, y'all?
I think on this campus in particular, a big frustration is that there feels like not that much of a movable middle. It feels like we're kind of in extremes. Like there's too much power to the people who we feel like we can't change their minds, you know?
The one.
And so like, what do we do then? Like if we're not going to change their minds, if they have all the power, then I mean, there's just, what do we do?
What?
Right, that's true. That's a good.
What
point.
was it?
Rethink who's got the power.
Oh, we think about the power, yeah. And how are they? Who are they? And how they? I don't want to get in any trouble now. More in trouble about that Chick-fil-A thing now. But no, I mean, and Cooper, what do you do?
Well, like JoJo, I've been thinking a lot about this word intentionality that you used.
Yeah.
Because for me, I grew up in, like probably many people in this room, I grew up in an evangelical kind of community, right? And intentionality is a word that's used a lot in evangelical communities. It's like definitely a buzzword. And I think that I bring, although I don't really consider myself part of that community anymore, a lot of times that's something that I like find useful in the work that I do, like you're talking about, this idea of intentionality. But unfortunately, I think although social media has some good points that we wind up, I don't feel like intentionality has the same usefulness in social media because we wind up in these like echo chambers and online people kind of define by what they think is right. And I think that intentionality is a lot more useful on the ground. And so this like mediation through screens, it's hard. And it's a question that I'm not sure I really have an answer to. And in terms of campus, I do agree with Sarah that it's very polarized. So that's kind of a non-answer to your question.
But I mean, it makes you wonder.
I think it is something that we need to think about very seriously. But I think JoJo is right that we've got major work to do, and that intentionality is a big part of that. And how do we the intentional, because we've done this a couple times with activist groups on campus where we've had these meetings where we try to build coalitions, and then we have a meeting, we all get each other's contact information, and nothing really coalesces. Right?
Everybody graduates.
Yeah, and everybody graduates.
And
that's not like calling anybody out, but it's just a reality. And how do we make that next step? But the thing is, and all these questions now are kind of coming together in my mind, but like Kendrick was asking about staff members who don't have tenure, and they have a little bit more of a long view because they're going to be here longer, but they have, this tenuous position that they could be let go. So then it's like, who has the staying power, and how do they continue to like build that framework in order for us to have like a long lasting organizing movement?
Well, I say dip back into junior high school. It's almost like you have to dip so far back because whoever's coming into this place, and it's not just you all, I mean, name it. But if you think about it, going back the other way, if whatever the trajectory it might be, and thinking about it. And then here's the other one, quite honestly. I have been a lifelong bridge builder all of my life. I don't have any problem being the only one, whatever that means. But if you have people who are willing to play that role, and that can be from all points of view. So if you know you're going to be moving on senior year, whatever, because otherwise just is that, oh, there goes the health class, we have to start all over again. No, you don't. And if it's based on the principles and what you want to do and not on the who, that stays. And it might mean having to confront and or figure out how this power system might be and whatever that might be. Or here's the other option. I'm leaving, but I'm leaving and I'm going to go make something else happen. Or you have like a class or whatever it might be. But what I love is that there's options and people, and it's a struggle. There's no guarantee, none. You just figure out that might be what you have to do. How are we on time?
We're just about out. So.
Okay, close it up. And again, did you, real quick? Get in a little room and seriously start that conversation, but being honest about what we might want to get done. I'm going to wrap this up in a neat way, I hope. And again, I'm here. I hope to get to see as many of you as possible and whatever. And I'll be back. I mean, I am so humbled about being in this conversation. One of the interesting questions we had for the LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, same gender, whatever, was this interesting question. We've got some major wins, marriage equality and whatever. But then I had this question about when we get these gains, and sometimes we might lose them, whatever. But the question I have for our community and our movement is, are we about justice or are we about just us? And if you pose that question, and that could be for any of our however we identify, because if you answer that question, well, wait a minute. But it is all about justice that includes us. Then the question is the how, the who, the where, the when, the tears, the joy, whatever. But I'd rather be in it right now with y'all. I'm not kidding. And that has to happen intentionally. And I can tell you, again, against the tremendous pushback that we're seeing, that to me is like, we're getting nervous because you're all going to come together and have a conversation, and we might talk about the if, not the when. Right? We good? Are we good? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.